Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. It's Friday afternoon. I'm Paul John Dykes. I'm joined by Alan Morrison. I'm joined by Ryan Pearce, and we are still buzzing, gentlemen, after a meaningful Champions League victory. I'm going to ask you first, Ryan. We're talking ripple effects, and those ripples have reached the States, haven't they? How did you enjoy the game?
It was brilliant. It was great to be at the pub to watch it. I don't get in there as much as I want to just because of the commute. Everyone was in a great mood. James and everyone down at the Banshee in Dorchester, just south of Boston, having a good time. I think it's not so much to me a couple things. It's not just being the first victory and the way we won. I think it just actually it is kind of the way we won. It wasn't like a scrappy victory in which we nicked a goal. We were just dominant from start to finish. And I even remember, I love seeing Big Joe Hart doing his analysis, him even showing Engels 90th minute of the game. We're up 5-1 and he's still chasing down a player in the corner. He's still getting pumped up for blocking from the outside. That type of energy, for me, I feel like that's how we should play every single game. And that's why I'm buzzing. It gives us that confidence.
Oh, yeah. And the big thing for me, Alan, is over the last few days, the mention of Ange Postecoglou has come into some discussions, and I guess it's because there was that transition period. We've tried to theorise about how clunky it was, when Brendan came in. And I think Ryan's mentioned Joe Hart. It was very interesting, that little bit of insight that Joe gave when he was talking about, Brendan came in, but he didn't really put his mark on it probably until the kind of February time. And you could see that. What we're seeing now, it would appear, Alan, is a Brendan Rodgers team in full flow.
Yeah, I think that's been the pleasing aspect of the season in totality for me. And it was the thing I was looking at for this particular game was we started the season, and it really started in pre-season, looking like a very well-coached, well-managed, cohesive team that had a plan and everybody knew their jobs. And it's kind of where we got to in Postecoglou's second season in particular, where the level of, rehearsal almost in terms of attacking patterns, especially the relentlessness of the pressing off the ball, rendered, especially the domestic opposition, almost incapable of raising a shot at goal at times. Now, and we've almost started this season in a similar vein domestically, and we're seeing the similar effect whereby under Postecoglou, Starfelt came in obviously, and it was problematic. There was a lot of positional errors and a lot of individual errors. But what was noticeable was in his second season, he was far, far more stable. And it really, what happened was that the strength of the system and the strength of the collective helped to mitigate any individual weaknesses in players to a large degree. And I think we're seeing the same thing here. We've all had question marks over the left side of the team, especially off the ball. Taylor's recovery pace, Scales' his positional play, getting caught under the ball, lack of recovery pace, Hatate, the ease at which he's ran past. But these things have all improved because of the strength of the collective, and that was evident across the domestic game. So what I was looking for was, how will this stress to playing at Champions League level? Now, I don't know that I don't know that we've fully answered that, and we'll find out a lot more in Dortmund and in Bergamo. But it was certainly hugely pleasing because Slovan Bratislava. It was an interesting counterpoint with the Hearts game, right? So obviously Hearts play Celtic 4 times a season at least. Hearts, even an incompetent manager like Naismith, knows how to set up a team reasonably sensibly to play against Celtic. And he set up a kind of mid-block, but very, very compact. Vladimir Weiss is an enormously experienced manager. He's managed international teams successfully to big tournaments. But the way he set up his team was just really, really bad. He set up a very similar structure to Hearts, but just executed it. It was executed really, really poorly. The spacing was wrong. The gaps between players was too big, and there was the lack of the absolute passivity of the team really let Celtic run amok, actually. So we're not going to see that level of opposition ineptitude in Dortmund or against Atalanta, and certainly not against Leipzig. But in terms of where we've come from, which is losing to teams like Slovan, in fact, losing to teams that are far worse than Slovan in European Champions League qualifying, especially, then it was hugely encouraging.
Yeah, I totally echo everything you've said there. And it leads us on to that discussion, I guess, that the way we approached that game the other night, how will we approach games against Dortmund away against Atalanta, Alan? And I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on that. There was a lot of comments coming in relation even to personnel. You know, maybe Bernardo's better suited to these games away from home. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments, and also Alan will furnish us possibly with some data to back up an opinion as well. Barry O'Sullivan, is anyone going to Dortmund? Let us know in the comments field if you are one of the lucky ones going to Dortmund, and indeed with a ticket. Jungle Line, here's an interesting one. See, the record are now saying Ange will go and Rodgers will take over. It's killing them, the steamroller. You know the thing, right, is see Brendan Rodgers' second time round, Ryan. It's like there definitely is a massive change in the man, right? And I think, you know, when he came back the second time round in the first press conference, everybody's asking about reasons for leaving, what's changed, etc. I think he has come across differently, and I do think it took him a wee while to warm up last season. But the other night, what I really enjoyed was it was back to kind of box office Brendan, where he backs himself. He's not walking about that park after the game thinking, "Oh, I'm a lucky guy to be here." That's where he wants to be. He wants to be at a stadium like Celtic Park after a Champions League victory. He thinks he deserves to be there, and I like that attitude. I don't see it as arrogance.
No, it can't be arrogance. I think it's confidence, and I think that's great. One of the biggest concerns I had going into the game 2 days ago was the psychological factor that we have on, you know, if we were playing that team in a Europa League game versus if we're playing that same exact team in a Champions League game. Just the song and the badge and the noise and everything like that. Not how much is that niggling feeling in the back of Celtic players' minds going to be is we don't deserve to be here. So it's great to see Brendan kind of leading that charge in terms of that confidence. I think he's grown and developed himself as a manager. He's aged. He's gotten more pragmatic. But I think I'm wondering if what you see in him is there was always that question mark as can he get Celtic to that next level? And last night was the first indications that we're trending in that direction. And I know there's a lot of complaints about how long it took with the window, but you know, when it's all said and done, you look back on the whole, and the board backed him. Engels in 2 games has been fantastic, and just showing he's going to do nothing but grow beyond that. Players like Scales and other ones in the team seem to be growing better and better and better. So it's purely the reason that we said once Ange left that Brendan was likely, and I still believe is, the best option we can get, and we're very lucky to have him now.
Yeah, and it is great to have peak Brendan Rodgers back. He's the guy who wants to win trebles. You know, we were talking yesterday about this, Alan, how Brendan Rodgers normalised the winning of trebles for generations, like my own. I had enjoyed Arne Engels' treble-winning campaign, but it didn't happen too often until Brendan came to town, and now it's something, no, we don't expect it, but when you're looking at your aspirations for a season, you want to win everything. And that, again, isn't arrogance. It's just that will to succeed. Now, Joe Hamilton comes in on the YouTube. Great to see you, Joe. Good afternoon, good people of Celtic. Even the German-speaking football channels are starting to take notice of Brendan's boys. And when I'm talking about this ripple, Alan, I'm talking about, you know, press from all over Europe. The atmosphere is something that's always spoken about. But what we don't want, Alan, is for the Celtic Park game to be something on a bucket list. All the big players want to come, experience the bright atmosphere, get a resounding victory, and jump back on the plane. We want them not only to, you know, be blown away by the atmosphere, as many of the players were the other night, but also for Celtic Park to become a fortress again. And if we want to do anything in Europe, we really need to work on that, don't we?
Yeah, no, that all comes with it. I mean, the crowd were fantastic. You could see the Slovan players as the game wore on, you know, physically sort of shrinking, really. I mean, some of that was just sheer fatigue. I mean, that was a really old side. I mean, their centre-back's 38 years old. Their holding midfield's 37 years old. Apart from the goalkeeper and the striker, I think they were all near enough over 30. So, you know, we hounded them to absolute distraction. And that's really the secret, I think, to how Celtic are going to be competitive in the rest of these matches, because we can't afford to buy players, you know, of the caliber of, you know, Florian Wirtz or you know, Odegaard or De Bruyne, or players like that technical ability. But what you can do is be well organized and be well coached, and you can be very well organized off the ball. And this is the thing that Brendan has been emphasizing all season. He's been emphasizing the press. Now the press is everyone thinks, oh yeah, pressing. I go to grassroots football every week, and I see all the sort of wannabe Mourinhos that manage these teams on a Sunday morning.
Initials on their bubble jackets,
Alan.
Alan,
all that roaring at these children during the game, shouting and screaming and bawling, and all this. And a lot of the teams they press like mad for 20 minutes, and then of course they're dead on their feet and they can't do it anymore. So pressing is a very difficult thing to do well, right? It's an easy thing to do, very difficult to do well. And where I think we're seeing Brendan's mark on the Celtic side, and where it will give us hope for the games in against the better opposition technically in the league, is this pressing and counter pressing capability, because it comes down to communication, organization, players responding to the same triggers in the same way, timing, execution. Right? You're not just running after players endlessly when you lose the ball. You're doing it at the right time in the right circumstances. And Celtic, Celtic actually turned the ball over nearly as much as Slovan did. That might surprise you. Nearly as much, but we forced Slovan to turn the ball over in far more dangerous areas of the pitch, and it was far more impactful. And that is because you don't have to spend 100 million to get somebody who's good at pressing. You might have to spend 100 million to get somebody who can control a game like a Xavi or an Iniesta or whatever. But you don't have to spend 100 million to get professional athletes to press coherently. You need smart players that are bought into it, that are willing to listen, that respond to their teammates. And I think Celtic's building that. Rodgers is building that. He's building a squad of good people as well as good athletes. People, and by that I mean, they listen, they understand, they execute. They're good teammates, and that's what I think that's the big thing that we're seeing. Because what was evident, and this is where Arne Engels especially stood out for me, it's actually off the ball. In terms of pressing volume, he was right up there with Maeda. But pressing volume is one thing. So Nicholas Kuhn, excellent in terms of sheer effort, but his pressing quality is not high. A lot of his presses are unsuccessful. He doesn't regain the ball a lot, but he puts the effort in. Whereas Maeda and Engels, the pressing quality is high. So the presses lead to regains. The presses last for longer, and they're more intense, etc. And I think it's that and fostering that's going to give Celtic a chance in these other games.
There's a couple of players that you've mentioned there, Alan, that I want to focus on. When you're talking about the press, I want to talk about Maeda. And then I want to also rewind to a conversation you and I had probably before Andy's second season in Europe. And we were talking about the type of midfielder that we lacked. And I want to ask you about Engels and where he fits into that. I'm going to jump over to Ryan first, though, and talk about Maeda. Maeda's a guy who obviously we see week in, week out. We know his attributes, but he has created a massive ripple effect across the football the football world, because people are now talking about him going, look at his pressing as if it's a new thing. We've been seeing this now for 2 years, but it was sensational the other night, wasn't it?
Sensational, but I'll piggyback on what Alan's saying is that it was measured. I think there was a instance, it was talked about in the pod recently, where Maeda had an opportunity to go press, and then he realized he didn't have the support he had, so he kind of held back a bit. And a couple of things bringing up on that, and I'm curious to get Alan's perspective on this too, is we say that Slovan set up the similar way to Hearts in that mid-block kind of press, but didn't execute as well. When I look back to the opportunities, a lot of the opportunities I saw Celtic getting was in transition. There was times in that game, especially towards the latter parts of that first half, where they were sitting back and we were just recycling the ball over and over and weren't creating many chances. But it was when they got the ball, I was wondering if a team like Slovan and a team like the rest of the teams in the Champions League are going to be more encouraged than like a Hearts or St. Mirren to break out, which gives us space and opportunity to counterpress. And I think what excites a lot of Celtic players, Celtic fans about that is a lot more teams in the Champions League are going to take more risk, put more players forward. And I completely agree with you. It's a lot, not easier, but to get players like Maeda, to get players like Kuhn, to get players like Kyogo. And now one thing I am interested with not to do the endless comparison of Matt O'Reilly to Engels, but it seems like Engels has more pace in him. The one area that you can say O'Reilly was silky smooth and he just knew where to be at the right time, and that built that into game. Engels has that pace, so now you have this many players harrying the defense. I think that counter pressing game is going to be the stamp that Brendan puts on this team to a completely different way. And final thing I'll say on that is cracking up to myself when you say you go to these Sunday league teams and you see teams press like mad for 20 minutes and they're knackered for the rest of the game. I think you just described Ronnie Dahlia's tactics, because that's what used to drive me nuts, is the team was completely knackered towards the end. There was no rhyme or reason. It was just run around like chickens with your head cut off. So I'm super encouraged with that. To have that be our stamp, to be that counter pressing team, means we can apply that model to the Slovans and we can apply that model to the Dortmunds and the Manchester Cities and the likes.
No, you're right there, and it brought back a memory actually of the story Charlie Mulgrew tells about sugar being banned from the canteen. So anybody that liked the sugar in their coffee or the tea had to smuggle it in, and had a wee deal with a woman that worked behind in the canteen. Aye, give me 2 sugars, and it was all hidden from Ronnie Dyler. Yeah, you're right. We were knackered more often than not. Some great comments coming in. Keep them coming. Of course, we've got Falkirk, who are a team on form at the weekend, and we'll be discussing whether or not there'll be wholesale changes, or even though they're a league below us, if that would be a risk. So let us know your thoughts in the comments. I want to talk about Engels, because it's one of the ones, Alan, where you are buying a player there who straight off the bat looks like a different level, a different standard of signing. I was talking yesterday about the midfielders we brought in the summer last year. The midfielders we brought in, of course, Bernardo on loan, who I think's turned out to be a brilliant signing. Home, Kwon, these guys who you're kind of taking a chance on, hoping that they will develop. But in the same age category, we have brought in a player, Arne Engels, who's cost us a lot of money, but you can see that money on the park. I mean, for me, you and I spoke about it. He's described himself as a box-to-box. You were talking about concerns around the athleticism or the physicality of our midfield. Is Arne Engels that man, do you think, Alan?
Listen, it's very early days. I don't want to sort of, go overboard after two home matches, albeit, what immediately impresses you about him is the fact that he's a 20-year-old guy, massive fee, and he's immediately come into the team, and he just looks so calm and he looks so confident. It's incredible for a young man to be that calm and confident with all of the pressure that must be around him. That's maybe partly Rodgers putting him at ease, and probably a lot to do with his own mentality as a person. So that's incredibly impressive. For one thing, he actually had a bit of a mixed game against Hearts, in the sense of what we saw was we saw him, and again, I don't want to overdo the O'Reilly thing, but he's kind of replaced him in the team on that right-hand side as a number 8, but they're quite different players. But what we did see is him getting into the box a lot, which I was really pleased about. He seems to be a player that A, gets into the box, B, seems to like to have a strike at goal, and my God, does he wallop it as well. He's got a hell of a shot on him. So those aspects were very pleasing. The pressing I've mentioned, and the counter pressing, that just raw athleticism. I mean, he's 6'1", 6'2", and he may not be lightning fast, but he covers the ground quickly. His long stride pattern, all that. So it's probably an uptick on athleticism and sheer strength on O'Reilly as well. What I don't think we're going to get is the same level of creativity in terms of line breaking passes and cute balls into the box and clever little dinks into the box and all that. I hope it comes. He's only 20. He may well develop. I'm sure it probably will. He's going to get loads of the ball in Scotland. He's going to get loads of opportunity in attacking areas. We've not seen it yet. We've seen great delivery from set pieces, which is also good. But that's the only thing that I would still look to see evidence of so far. But it's, again, not a criticism, because, as I say, he kind of balances out in other areas, especially just the raw athleticism that you need at this level. You do need that. When we come up against Dortmund in the next game, every single one of their midfielders and forwards are technically excellent, and they are huge, and they are fast, and they are strong, and you have to have that combination at that level to compete with these guys, unfortunately. And he is exactly the profile of player that I've been crying out for. In the Celtic midfield for some time. So loads more to come from him, as I say, early days, But what an impressive young man.
No, you're right, because he's roughly the same age. When you think about Bernardo, Kwon, and Home, he's in that category. Yet when you see him on the park, it's as if he's been born to play in that Celtic midfield. Franny Weldon, great shout. Yeah, the girls, the women's team, they won 4-2. What I found interesting, Franny, was the fact that the manager was not happy. Eleanor was not happy afterwards, and she gave them a bit of a ribbon, which actually I quite like, because it shows that she's got standards as well. We have, in actual fact, managed to organise for one of the Celtic women's players to join us on This Is Acsom. So very, very soon, that episode will air one Friday night. Over the next couple of weeks, we'll be talking to the mystery player, and she will be on the show. I'm really looking forward to that one as well. We've got a lot of people talking about the lineup for the weekend. Alan Robertson, great to hear from you, Alan. You're on the YouTube. Valle, Trusty and Ralston in, Bernardo and McCowan. But I would point out, and I think Jungle Lion's right, McCowan did play against Bonnyrigg Rose in an earlier round. So I'm thinking he's cup-tied. McCowan is cup-tied, says Alan Boyne. Now, another one, Celtic girl saying, please play Palma. I think we're going to break away from the European chat for a moment. I think Falkirk is a potential Baraniskin, Ryan, right? I think they're doing brilliantly. We all know that they're on this brilliant run in the league. 42-game unbeaten run. It's the third longest unbeaten run in Scottish League history. You've got to respect that. You're looking at their team. There's a couple of familiar faces in there. There's a young guy, or he was young at Celtic, Calvin Miller. He was, under Brendan Rodgers, very highly rated. He has lived something of a nomadic career, and now he's back in Scottish football with Falkirk, doing really well with them. I don't think it's a case of making half a dozen changes, Ryan. I would be far more cautious than that. What do you think Brendan will do?
I think there'll be some changes in the team, but I think I agree with you. I see some people post in the chat, and I've seen some things on Facebook in the last few days that we can put out our second team and comfortably win this game. And while I agree, I can't see him leaving McGregor out. I think obviously with him retiring from Scotland, he's had a couple weeks break, and he's kind of raring to go. So I think there's no reason to leave him out. I would be interesting to see if we are comfortably ahead in this game around the 60th minute, what this team looks like without him. I would hope to see two players in there in Palma, because I think he had a promising preseason. I don't think he's kind of gone around and improved all the areas that we want to, but I did notice, at least from my own observation, Alan might disagree, that his pressing was a little bit better in preseason. I'm wondering if that's something that's being drilled into his game. I think he's realized if he's going to dislodge Dyson, he's got to add that element to his game. Bernardo coming in, I think, is a no-brainer too. I think what's going to be interesting is what we do in the back line. I think this might be an opportunity to bring someone in for CCV. I'm not sure if there's a little niggling knock he's had. CCV has always been solid for us as a man, built like a fridge, but I don't know. It hasn't really reached the exact heights. So maybe a little rest here would be good. The question is, who do you bring in? Do you bring in Welsh? And does that mean that Welsh is going to injure his shoulder in 30 minutes, and you're going to have to bring him CCV back on? But those are the people I'd be interested in seeing. I'd love to see someone else replace CCV, maybe Trusty. I'd love to see Bernardo in the midfield and Palma on the left, just give Maeda a wee bit of rest. And then beyond that, I wouldn't do too many changes. Maybe you can bring Jamesy in for Kuhn, because you can trust that. But I don't expect him to make wholesale changes at this point.
Yeah, Alan, what do you think, Alan? Because you do have a strong bench if you do make the changes, of course. But like everybody else, I do want to have a look at Valle. I want to have a look at Trusty, for example. How would one of our new recruits do on the wing? See, when we're talking about the wing, I asked the question in the WhatsApp group about transfers, and we'll come back to that, because I think it's interesting how little used, how seldom seen Palma and Yang have been this season. And if it's maybe in Rodgers' mind that we can upgrade that area as well come January. And again, I'm looking so far ahead, Alan, because we're talking about playoffs, being ineligible until the playoff round in the Champions League. But that's what Brendan's done. He's given us a bit of confidence. A few changes perhaps at the weekend, but playing it a wee bit more safe, Alan, because Falkirk, they may be a division below us, but they're a good side.
Yeah, so before I get onto the Celtic team, just a few words on Falkirk, right? So I some of you may know, some of you may not know, I was actually born in Falkirk, and when I was a wee boy and too young to go through and see Celtic, I used to go to Brockville, and just because I loved football and wanted to go and see football. So I used to be a regular down there before I was old enough and big enough to go through to Glasgow. And my oldest friends are Falkirk fans, so I kind of follow them quite closely, so I know a lot about their team. This is a really good side, by the way, right? So, and so we talked previously about what Celtic need to become against the likes of Dortmund, Atalanta, the bigger pot 1, pot 2 teams, is mitigate the quality and the technical gap by being a really good side and especially off the ball. Falkirk under John McGlynn will play the same way on Sunday as they play every other match. They're not going to sit back in a low block. They're not going to hunker down, play counter-attacking football. They play 4-2-3-1. The two centre-backs are footballing centre-backs. They're both really good on the ball. The two sitting midfielders aren't your traditional holding midfielders that like to fly into tackles. They're both footballers, right? And the attacking players, you mentioned Calvin Miller. I think Cal Morrison, who's been their top scorer the last 3 or 4 seasons, he's injured. And Aidan Nesbitt, another ex-Celt, who's normally their number 10, he's injured as well. So they're actually got to the top of the championship without arguably their two most experienced, influential, and productive attackers. But essentially, because, again, like Celtic, because the system is so strong, the players that have slotted in to replace them, it hasn't had a negative impact on their performances and their results. So this is for those of you that are swithering about whether to go along or not. I strongly encourage you to go along on Sunday, because this is going to be a really good game of football. They will come and play. Now, whether they've got the strength and the experience to counter Celtic, I'm sure probably in the end they won't. But this team, because of the strength of the team, even though they got promoted, they haven't changed the personnel. 2 of their loan signings became permanent, and essentially the team is the same as the one that went invincible the season before, and they're now clear at the top of the championship, right? And if you look at it, that's not a fluke. It's not like they've been scraping games 1-0. They've been dominating every single game and winning well. So this is a team that's probably better than at least 3 or 4 of the teams that will play in the SPFL.
Good point.
And as I say, and they won't play the way that most teams, even Hearts, they won't play the way most teams come to Celtic Park and play. They will come and try and play against Celtic. So it's going to be a fascinating match. So back to Celtic. Having said all that, right, and acknowledging what you said earlier, Paul, that Brendan Rodgers wants to win a treble. Absolutely no doubt about that. If you cannot play Sinisalo in this game, if you cannot play Valle in this game, if you cannot play your £6 million centre-back and give him his debut in this game, what the hell are they doing? Why would they come to this club? So I think that there's an element of you have to give these guys a game, and this is probably the best game to do it in. I think there's another couple of issues in the back line. So Alistair Johnston went off with a back complaint the other night, and that's on top of concerns about his hamstring. Now, these things, I don't know, I'm just speculating, but these things are often related, right? So I wouldn't be taking any risks with him at all. I would give him a couple of weeks off in terms of match play to get him into proper shape. I think Ryan's absolutely spot on about Carter Vickers. Carter Vickers gave a performance on Wednesday that was very unlike Carter Vickers. He did 80% of what he had to do really well, but he was really skittish in moments. He a couple of bad errors, giving the ball away, the late free kick that he gave away, got a yellow card for. These are very un-Carter Vickerish type mistakes that he made. And I'm exactly like Ryan. I suspect he's carrying something. It was only a couple of weeks ago he was in a boot leaving a game. So whether
can I just clarify that was a moon boot and not in a boot of a vehicle? getting smuggled away from Celtic.
It'd have to be more of a kind of van, wouldn't it? Really, than
it would. Yeah.
What a big significant van. So again, if there's any doubts about his fitness going forward, given the games that we've got coming up, I would rest him. So I can see that on that basis, what I've just said, basically a completely different back five. I think then when you move forward, I don't see who replaces McGregor. That's the problem. So I think McGregor will get flogged again because I just don't see who replaces him. I think Bernardo will play because he was only a sub at the weekend, so he'll get a start. And then it's really who comes in that other midfield position. I wouldn't be surprised if he keeps playing Engels. He's a big, strong boy, and he wants to get him integrated in the team. So we could see Bernardo and Engels, and then up front. I think I'm pretty confident that Ida will start up front. He needs a full run out. He's got his first goal. I think Maeda. I mean, he played the full 90 minutes, ran himself into the ground again. I'm sure Palma will come in, although I think the wide forward areas was the one area Brendan didn't get what he wanted in the transfer window. I think it's suboptimal. Bringing even Jamesy, bless him, on great assist the other night, but I don't know how much of a game changer he's going to be away at Dortmund, for example. I think those days may have gone just because of natural age regression. And Kuhn got taken off quite early, so I wouldn't be surprised if Kuhn actually starts on the right. And maybe Forrest comes on because otherwise it's just far too many changes, I suppose. Because as I say, I'm not suggesting Falkirk are going to run over Celtic. I'm not saying that, but this is going to be a right good game of football, and Celtic need to be on their game. Whoever plays, they'll need to be on their game.
Yeah,
it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see. You said the point about Engels. It's almost like a training exercise of what is your mentality coming down from the high of a Champions League game and refocusing on playing a championship team like Falkirk. And can you make that transition? So I mean that's another good reason to bring him on, which I didn't consider. So excellent point.
Yeah, I know, and another opportunity for us to see what looks like a fantastic signing. Alan, you're back in. You're talking about Sinisalo, and Alan did make the point: if he doesn't play in a game like this, when does he play? I know that there's an emotional attachment for Kasper Schmeichel. He played some of his younger career at Falkirk and all that, but we've got to look at the best for all the players. And the reason I'm bringing up this next one, Alan, right? Don't get too embarrassed. It's because if you are prepared to put your neck on the chopping block and give your opinion on a podcast, then you will get flack and criticism and sometimes abuse. Now and again it happens, Alan. So when you get something
I've no idea what you're talking about.
You've never noticed. Liam Devine comes in and says some nice words, and I'm bringing him up. Alan is the highest level content in the podcast game. There you go. Fantastic.
Thank you, Liam. Very kind.
We love a bit of positivity. AR, Palma may have talent, but his work ethic is dog meat. I don't know if that is a technical term, AR, but I don't think there's any doubt that Palma has the technical ability, Ryan. I mean, we have seen it. We've seen it in Champions League games last season. What is it that's missing there? There's definitely something, isn't there? I mean, when Brendan Rodgers had a good look at Said Haksabanovic, for example, who I know we were kind of deploying on the wing. I don't think he had the pace to be a winger. He sussed them out. He sussed them out and decided, right, whatever ability you have, you're not going to fit in my team. But he's not done that with Palma. And I think that's pretty telling. We had bids for him in the summer. He didn't sell him. It may have been that we just didn't have someone lined up to replace him. Who knows what the scenario was. But it looks as though I still feel a little bit on the fence with Palma. What's your take on him, Ryan?
I think he still needs a chance, and here's why. If we go back to last season, the first half of last season, we were relying on him, and he was delivering. His right foot was whipping in some crosses and some passes that were unbelievable. He had some, dead balls, some long shots. I think he has this ability to kind of do something that Kuhn does at times, where he kind of cuts back and goes inside and floats the ball over and locks the defense like that. But we did see some of that deficiencies with his work ethic. And I think around the time last season when Brendan was trying to put his own authority on the team, he had to rely on players he can trust. He realized he had to focus on the press. He can rely on James. He can rely on Maeda, which, if we remember, I feel like in the beginning of last season, there was question marks of, is Maeda the right player for Brendan? And now I think he's really unlocked how he needs to play, which kind of goes back to my earlier statement. Going into the preseason, when we start thinking about when Brendan develops players, what are some of the deficiencies that he helps work on? One of my favorite lines from Callum McGregor's autobiography is when he talks about, developing from a winger into a central midfielder, and the advice that Brendan gave him. And one of the simplest advices he gave him was, if you don't know where to stand, find the referee and go right next to him, because he's usually standing in the area of the pitch where you need to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just little things like that. So when I look at other players, I look at Scales. My biggest complaint about Scales last season, I thought he did amazing on the defense, is that he lingered on the ball and that he kind of second-guessed himself and made the wrong decision, put us under pressure. I feel like the reason we're seeing so much better of him right now is he's distributing it quicker. He obviously has Schmeichel as a little bit more of someone he can trust behind him, but he's making faster decisions or giving the ball away, so it doesn't have that much of effect. So there are players that are addressing the deficiencies. I saw that with Palma in preseason. I saw him pressing more. His goal against Man City, he anticipated the press and he kind of came in. Or sorry, against Chelsea, he anticipated the press and that kind of cut that in there. He kind of was pressing, gets the injury. And I think it's kind of delayed his recovery back into it. So I think this is the opportunity to say, okay, you're part of this team that has the Brendan Rodgers identity, which is the press and the counter press. How do you fit into this team in September 2024? And how can you use your strengths and play to that? I think we need to give him a chance. And I think he's determined to do it. We just got to give him a few games and not write him off. That's where my position is.
I wonder what Alan's take is on this one, because I've spoke to you so many times, Alan, where I've said, as a football fan, you're watching a game and you can't quite put your finger on why a player doesn't have something. Why is it not clicking for him? And often, we lend ourselves to saying to you, Alan, go and explain it to us. Why doesn't he fit in this team? And often you can give us some data on this. What is your take on Palma? Is he still in the building because we couldn't find a replacement for him in the transfer window? Is that your take on that?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of, for me, you mentioned Haksabanovic earlier, and I think that's a good analogy. He's to me, Palma is a number 10 trapped in a winger's body. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have the pace, never mind top end pace like Kuhn. He doesn't even have the sort of functional pace to be an effective winger for me at a high level. And yet here he is. And I think Haksabanovic was the same. I think he would make an excellent out and out 10, but we don't play with an out and out 10. We haven't done since Rogic under Lennon, really. So I think in that regard, he's just kind of square peg. I think Rodgers, that lack of pace that he has, I think that was a red flag for Rodgers initially. But I think, I'm interested in Ryan's comments about Palma pre-season. I think, if I look at last season and when Palma has played, he has posted some fantastic numbers, some great performance data, but it's very inconsistent. It's very up and down. It's kind of feast or famine. Mm-hmm. And that does speak to, kind of attitude type of issues. And my understanding is, I do believe that is kind of the main issue. And at any level of football, even the screaming, bowling, mini Mourinho level that Ryan and I were talking about earlier, if you don't trust a player, that trust is absolutely intrinsic to all levels of football manager, and none more so than the professional level. And I don't think Rodgers trusts Palma, and that trust is very difficult to get back once it's lost, almost impossible, I would say. And Palma doesn't strike me as a sort of player that is going to knuckle down and win back that trust. So I think personally that he's being played out of lack of any. He's a more productive player than Yang. He trusts Forrest. You know what you're going to get with Forrest. Age decline, natural age decline, all that taken into consideration. You're going to get an intelligent game from Forrest. So I think we're seeing a player that's, where, like you say, where ideally it would be in another area of the team that was strengthened in the window, and we didn't run out of time, run out of resources, or whatever it was to do that. So that's my take on him. Others, I'm sure, might disagree. I think Ryan probably disagrees. That's fine. But I think it's predominantly an attitude thing. But I think he had a long hill to climb just due to lack of pace. As I say, where I would play him, Celtic don't play that way. So I think he'll make a cracky number 10 for another team.
This is the thing, these players can go and thrive elsewhere. And I was looking at, you know what, we're allowed to dream, we're football fans, right? And I was looking at the possibility of, you know, finishing in that group between numbers 9 and 24 and having the playoff. And looking at, right, what happens in the January transfer then? Because obviously these games will be beyond bringing in new players. And then obviously there's a whole shift, isn't there? So if you bring anybody in January, they'll be able to play in the playoff games. Is that the area, Alan? Do you think that Brendan will focus on the fact that for me, you've got two brilliant starters in Maeda and in Kuhn, and I think there's a lot more to come from him. But then, like you say, the age progression of Forrest, as much as I think is an important part of the squad, and then on the left-hand side, I think the quality, there's a big drop there. Is that the areas that we're going to be looking at, do you think, in January?
Yeah, I think so. I think we still need, obviously, we've cycled through a lot of central midfielders that don't seem to have worked out. And Holmes seems to be the latest one that's disappeared. And again, Rodgers spoke to attitude, he's, quite pointedly in pre-season. And again, it's a long way back. Once that's under question, once the manager doesn't trust you for that reason, it's a long, long way back for you as a professional. So I say that's still an area. And I agree with you. The wide forward areas. I mean, we've only really got. We could argue you've got three strikers if you include Maeda. I think Maeda is excellent as a 9. I would even argue this is probably his best position as a 9. But so we've got three strikers, but one of them you want on the left. So I think we're light in the wide forward areas for sure, and that is an area that needs strengthened. But listen, what happened? What we've seen with Engels, what we've seen with O'Reilly. What I think we'll see with Bernardo is, this is hugely important in terms of you started the show talking about ripples and about ripples through to wider audiences. People will. It's such a shame O'Reilly got injured early for Brighton. If he was starting in the Premier League now, and people saw what a talented player he was, Engels moving from the Bundesliga to the Scottish Premier League for big money. And shining on the Champions League stage, people notice these things, right?
Yeah.
So I think Celtic are moving into an area now where hopefully everyone at the club is comfortable or will become comfortable with the investment that's been made in Engels, because it's not just the amount of money that we paid for him in a transfer fee. He's on a big wage, right? So, but people will be comfortable with that if it's proven to be successful, raises the profile of the club, and if it means the agents of good players that might even be playing in top 5 leagues are interested in their client coming to the club, and that therefore we can strengthen areas like wing, not by taking a punt on a kid from South Korea, but by maybe taking a punt on a 20-year-old who's shown signs in Serie A that he's got something, but is within our reach because we can afford more wages than some of the mid-table teams, even in the top 5 leagues, right? So I think the Matt O'Reilly effect, the Engels effect, hopefully will allow us to strengthen in those areas, but to a higher level. And hopefully the club now realizes that if we want to compete at this level, you have to do that. You have to invest in the quality, which is what Brendan Rodgers has been saying all along.
Yeah, and you've hit on a great point there. How comfortable do you think, Ryan, some people at the club will be? Because we got into this probably a comfort zone, if you like, of I can buy a player at 2 or 3 million quid and we'll still win, largely domestically. And then you get a manager who comes in like Brendan, who wants to push that envelope. And now, quite rightly, he's saying, this is the results you get when you do that. When you go to the Bundesliga and bring in an £11 million player, rather than going to Norway or going to Korea and bringing in a £1-2 million player. How comfortable will those who count every single margin at Celtic Park? Because it's a culture change, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a shift. I think it's interesting because you have to understand the inherent risk in it, but 2, you have to accept the fact that to speak in pure business terms, your margin, your return on investment is not going to be percentage-wise as big. Buying a player at 1.5 and selling him for 25, like we did with Matt O'Reilly, that's 25x, or whatever the math is of what you're getting in return, versus buying Engels at 10 and selling him for 40. That's 4x. It's still 30 million in your pocket. So I think it's an acceptance of that. I wonder how much as excited we all were that a lot of the non-contributing players were sold this summer. They were sold at a profit, which also could say, hey, well, let's not get away from the 1 million, the 2 million here and there. But going to that same point with the winger, when I look at, if we're going to bring someone in the Engels position of it, I feel like I completely agree. We need to, if we can't bring in someone and that quality, someone that maybe we're bringing in for 8, 9, 10 million to immediately come into the team and make an impact, and probably moving on someone like a Palma or a Yang, then we shouldn't be adding into it, because I think it's too congested in that area with okay players that we're waiting to kind of break out. And I hate putting James Forrest in that, because I think he's a legend for the club, but I think it just with his age and his decline, that you kind of have to put him in that area. I think the only real player that you can say is, even Kuhn and Maeda, I think they show Maeda, as much as we love him, he has his deficiencies just with his first touch and his quality delivery at times. So I feel like you really need to bring in a player at that level. And will we have that, as we say on this channel, the testicular fortitude to do that? I don't know. I hope so. I just don't know.
When are we getting the testicular fortitude T-shirts? That's what people want to know. Kevin Graham, great to see you, my friend. Casper, Ralston, Trusty, Scales and Taylor, Bernardo, Kalmack and Engels, Forrest, Ida and Palma. Yeah, I could see that. Happening. There's a good point coming in from Barry, though. Barry says that Valle played right back for Barcelona. I'd give him a run out at right back. But this leads me on to the left back, Greg Taylor. Alan, you and I have discussed Greg Taylor long and hard over a number of episodes of A Celtic State of Mind. I was watching him with interest. I thought he was, the eye test for me told me I had a very good game the other night. I think he started off really well this season. I'm delighted we signed a left back, though, because he needed that challenge. He's not really had that challenge for a number of seasons. Surely we give him a new deal, regardless of whether or not that's an area that we want to strengthen, Alan. You need to give Greg Taylor a new deal, I think. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so listen, he's behind all this is a human being, and this particular human being is entering his 27th year this year. So this is his peak earning period as a professional footballer for Greg Taylor. So he's got to think long and hard about what his next move is. He's been at Celtic for quite a few years now. He's made that left back spot his own. We all know, like all Celtic players, really, I guess, otherwise they'd be at Man City, is that, they've got limitations, they've got strengths, etc. Same with Greg Taylor. But what again, he's another one who, whether it's the Rodgers effect, it'll be many things, but it'll probably be Greg Taylor himself maturing, as I say, reaching his peak as a professional footballer, those 26, 28 years. He's not a player who relies on top-end speed, so he's not going to get impacted by losing too much of that. He's an incredibly athletic player in the sense of, I always remember, during lockdown, I think, remembering that, watching something feature on Celtic TV, they had all these fluffy features because we had nothing else to do but produce fluffy features and watch them. That he could do like a park run, like a 5K in like just 15 and a half minutes. It's like, wow, that is serious. That is really.
I'll not
really
give you my 5K time at the moment.
No, I won't give you mine either. I never broke 20 minutes though. But so 15 minutes seriously is impressive. Especially for footballers are not actually noted as being good long distance or medium distance runners. It's because their strength is sprint, stop. It's more interval type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I digress. Greg Taylor does have a lot of great physical attributes. I don't think they're the attributes that will decline so much. Like, James Forrest, winger, relied on top end speed. Clearly, as he gets older, that's going to reduce, and therefore his effectiveness will reduce. He'll make up for it in other ways. He's a bright guy. He's a bright player. Greg Taylor, probably less so. So Greg Taylor is entering this peak period now. What does he do? Does he want to stay at Celtic? If he does, then he probably wants a really good deal. And fair enough, absolutely fair enough to him. He's got his family to think about. He's got his future to think about. I suspect he could do very well elsewhere, but he's found a really nice niche at Celtic because of the way we play and the way that he's adapted his game almost back to his roots, really, as a young kid when he was a central midfielder. Is he's got this niche now of sort of helping Celtic flood that midfield. And he's so smart about where he moves on the pitch now and fills those gaps, fills those little half spaces between the defence and the midfield and picks up the ball and so forth. We know about his defensive deficiencies in the air. We know that his recovery pace isn't great. But, he doesn't get beaten much, right? He's a really smart defender. He may not win, that many aerial duels, but he doesn't let too many defenders go past him when he's in the right position. So a lot of upsides to Taylor. He is entering his peak. I would still personally, because it's football, it's a business. I would still, and I want the best for Celtic. I would still like a more athletic, faster player, in that position. But I doubt we'd find somebody that's as smart as Greg Taylor in picking positions on the field, linking the play, playing that inverted role that he does so well. I doubt we'd find somebody as smart as him to do that. And that's something Celtic need to think about it. Brendan seemed unequivocal that he wanted Taylor to sign on, and he did that thing that Brendan's very good at of sort of passing the ball to the forward. It's their problem, not my problem. I wanted to stay. You sort it out. He's very good at that. And that's maybe where it is. I'd be delighted if he stayed, but I would hope that we get somebody, slightly younger, faster, more athletic to push him and keep pushing him, because I think he's improving, Greg Taylor. I think I really do. And I think he's been great for Celtic this season, but it'd be great to have that sort of alternative backup, like we've got Ida for Kyogo, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And you look at his journey, you look at the fact that he has been the whipping boy for a lot of his Celtic career, but he has seen off players like Diego Laxalt, Volleyball and Goalie, and Alexandro Bernabe. Ryan, I do subscribe to what Alan's saying here. Get him signed up, but also challenge him. Get someone to breathe down his neck and bring in that extra quality if we can.
Yeah, I think that's necessary. I mean, it's be interesting to see how Valle fits into that. I think one of the things we liked about Valle is he's taller. He seemed a little bit more of that elk of a defender that we were hoping for to challenge Greg Taylor. I think it's a no-brainer to sign him up. I think there's several reasons in there, obviously because of the way he plays in the team, but also in the locker room. I think he's one of the key guys there in terms of the togetherness of this team, and the motivation of it. Interesting thing I'd be looking at if I was Greg Taylor in the situation. I feel like if that next move to a place to progress his career and challenge him in a certain way probably would have already happened this summer. A team would have come in and said, you've got 1 year left in your contract. We like you. We want to bring you in here. And I feel like if he does move on at the end of his contract, he might go to the same route of where we see David Turnbull right now in Cardiff, and just going into the dark hole the abyss that can be the English Football League. I would treat him, and I know I might get slack for this comment, I would treat him as Celtic's Philippe Lahm, in the sense of sign him up, and I can see a world for him as Cal Mac's deputy. One of the best areas I like seeing him play is in that center area of the pitch when he kind of comes in the inverted. His positional awareness of where to kind of be into that midfield area, I think it kind of fits him for there. So if you're saying we're signing you up, you're owning the position you're owning right now, we're going to be bringing in people in to challenge you, but there's still opportunities for you to fill in certain areas of the team as our captain kind of gets into later years in his 30s. I think that's a much better option for Greg Taylor than, go off and maybe a team like QPR will pick you up and hopefully you'll do well there. So I hope we do sign him up, but time will tell.
It's interesting you mentioned Turnbull. Well, I do keep an eye on players after they've left the club, and he's sitting on the bench down there, and you think to yourself, you're probably on a better wage, but what has this move done for your career? Greg Taylor, I found myself, Kevin Graham thinks this is funny, I found myself on an aeroplane with the Celtic squad. Circumstances I'll not get into, but anyway, I was observing them, as you could imagine from me being a sponge, observing the dynamic of who was popular and who was the ringleader and all this kind of stuff. And Taylor was in the middle of everything. And this is going back quite a few years ago now. And I remember then telling Kevin Graham, I'll say, you never guess what? Who's one of the boys of this team that everybody seems to gather round and look up to? And it was wee Greg Taylor. And at that time, I'm not even sure he was a regular in the first team. But it's a great point Ryan makes. And I've not watched the documentary in detail yet. I want to sit down and properly pay attention to it. But from the clips I've seen, he does seem that type of character, Alan. And that is vital at a team like Celtic, to have these characters. And I think that's what Ralston's good for, James A. Forrest is good for. They might not play every week, but they're very, very good in terms of the heartbeat of this football side and the personality that they add to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And a bit like, you know, as I get older, I'm more coming to the view that I'd rather have somebody with the personality, the character, the learning ability, the team ethic, attitude, commitment, professionalism, all those things. I'd rather have a Greg Taylor type person than somebody maybe a little bit more talented, but who's perhaps has a deficit in some of those areas. And if you've got a squad of players that are, you know, talented players, but also have all those things I've just listed, you will do well. You will do well as a football team. And I think you know, and I think Rodgers is big on that. I mean, you only have to listen to Engels speak, to the way that Matt O'Reilly spoke, the way that Greg Taylor speaks, the way that McGregor speaks, the way that Joe Hart speaks, Schmeichel speaks. These are mature young men, and they exude a certain, you know, professionalism and attitude. And if that is translated to their, you know, their performance on the training pitch, their willingness to learn, to adapt, to follow instruction, etc., then you've got a fighting chance. You need the talent, of course you do, but not at the cost of disrupting the dressing room, not at the cost of just, you know, I'll run my arse off today, but, you know, Sunday against Falkirk, I'm not sure I can be bothered. That doesn't cut it. At the elite level, that doesn't cut it.
You know, the first player that came to my mind, Georges Samaras. There you go. Champions League, he could be a match winner. Ross County on a Tuesday night, nah, he doesn't fancy it. But the other player I do want to discuss today is the other guy, I guess, in this squad who has come under immense kind of criticism, and that's Liam Scales. Liam Scales has been criticised. And by the way, you know, this was something I spoke about yesterday. I didn't fancy him, Ryan. I didn't fancy Liam Scales when we signed him. And he was thrown into this team during an injury crisis, and he's never left the team, and it's on merit. And the point I made the other night is that it's a Champions League opener. We have the best result, you know, for a long, long time in Europe, and there's £10 million worth of centre halves sitting on the bench kicking their heels because Scales is in there, and he is deserving of that jersey. He's probably been our best centre half this season. So all credit to Liam Scales.
Yeah, I mean, let's think about this statement. Would you, if I told you at the start of last season, at this point in time, Liam Scales would have started 7 Champions League games and gotten man of the match in 2 of them? That's where we are right now.
That is impressive.
It is impressive, and it's the kind of stories we love to see in this. I mean, he is you know, a Celtic boy through and through, and coming from Ireland, and we don't. These days, I feel like we don't get as many Irish players in the team as what we used to, especially through the youth system. So for him to kind of come in and make that position his own, it's going to be kind of interesting for me with Trusty coming in. Is Trusty's here pushing Scales to be better? And that just shows his own mental fortitude and kind of going through things. But I'll go back to an earlier statement is we all could agree that we had those kind of like how we had the heart and mouth moments with Joe Hart, which kind of went away last season with the way Brendan played and didn't put as much pressure onto him. I like the Scales I see him distributing the ball quicker. I see him lingering less. And football is a confidence game. Every player is going to have the highs and lows from their confidence. So if he's having less of those issues and more examples of great defending, then he's going to feel more galvanized to be that great defender. So I've been loving every minute of his development. He's deserved it. I think it's going to be very interesting. It's kind of a similar position right now to what I think of the winger. You brought in Trusty. I want to give Trusty a chance. I want to see how he fits in this team. I want to see how he adds to this back line. But is he someone that is good enough to come in right away and be, no doubt, you're in the team, you're better than what we have, and you immediately make an impact? Or is he going to sit there and say, I came in and the 2 people ahead of me just got better? And that's where I'm scared about with the winger situation. Don't bring in someone at the same level that just sits there and says, oh, I can't get Maeda off, I can't get Kuhn off, and I'm just sitting on the sidelines with Palma to my left and Yang to my right. But good on for the player. I've been loving every minute of it, and he's just keeps on defying what we thought would happen years ago when we wanted him out of this team. He was on your list. He's been on your list for a while, and
2 seasons running.
I know, and now he's probably on your list for first player on the team sheet.
Thanks for reminding me, Ryan.
Yeah,
I got it wrong for 2 years running.
Yeah.
Alan, you have got the data that will tell us where certain central defenders sit. And I think one of the ones that didn't surprise me, I was a massive fan, but it surprised a lot, was Chris Ayer. I remember him scoring really highly. Where does Liam Scales sit in the great scheme of things when you're bringing in some of the top centre-halves we've had?
Yeah, I need to revisit it. I just had a quick look at this season's. So I have a framework. Sounds posh, doesn't it? It just means that, a methodology, if you like, for evaluating all positions, but centre backs, especially, is one where the data and the eye test really do work quite well together, I think. Has been proven back to the likes of Van Dijk, and you mentioned Ayer and others like that. So players like peak Chris Julian, Benkovic in his brief time at Celtic, profile really, really highly in this regard. So, and then the other end of the scale, you've got your Jack Henrys and your Effie Ambroses, sadly. So Scales is generally profiled purely on defensive actions, more to that sort of bottom left quadrant, sadly. And he kind of still does. He's got the same fallibilities as Starfelt had, in that his defending outside the box is where his issues are. He gets caught under the ball. He tries to win balls he can't win. He gets drawn, like he did in the early moments of the game the other night. He gets drawn out wide, drawn into a situation where one pass and they're behind him, and that created a good opening for Slovan early in the game, which they butchered. You got that in him. On the flip side, he's an excellent defender of his box, which is why he often shines in games where Celtic are pushed back and the opposition are throwing balls into the box. He's an excellent in-box defender, same as Starfelt was actually. But he's a 6'3", left-footed, left-sided centre-back. Those are very, very rare. The ones that are actually good are even rarer. So he's always going to have a chance. And what he has done, as Ryan said, is, I don't have the data for it, but in terms of his passing, I do think it's improved. He does keep it simple generally. He has got the odd little Hollywood pass in him, which I do like. But other teams do let him have the ball, but he keeps things ticking. And I think, again, this season, I think the error rate has gone down. He still gets beaten in the air far too easily for me. He doesn't jump as high. In fact, he rarely gets off the ground a lot of the time as well. But I think net, when you look at him in the round, that what Rodgers has done is accepting his weaknesses. He believes his strengths are, he can accept his weaknesses. He can accept he's going to lose a ball for 30 yards. He's going to lose a header 30, 40 yards from goal. He's going to get drawn under the ball 30, 40 yards from goal. If he's got Carter Vickers covering, then he's more comfortable. He can accept that for the other aspects of his game, which have improved, the ball recycling, the how good he is in the box, defending the box, etc. So that's where I think we are. He's clearly trusted by the manager. I come back to that word again, and that's massive for him. And if Brendan Rodgers trusts him, who are we to argue in a sense? I still think we can probably do better, but until we don't, same as with Taylor, those guys have got the shirt, and they are absolutely 100% justified in having that shirt at this point in time, the way the team is playing. So, it's for someone else to win it off him. But at the moment, he's there on merit. To the point where Stockroom Tim's calling him Scaldini. I'll run with that. Not a problem with that. Sorry to interrupt you, Paul. There was a comment there about Scales seems to win a lot in there. I just want to address that because it's a really good point, right? So this is when I talked earlier about pressing. And what you get to be careful with data sometimes is you can get hung up on volume and not necessarily concentrate on quality, right? So, with Scales, yes, he does win the ball in the air in the sense of he goes up for the ball and it's his head that connects with it first. The problem is, with Scales, it's not often controlled, and we don't know where the ball's then going to go. So he can win the header, but then if the ball goes to the opposing midfielder or striker or what have you, you've lost possession, and it's a bit random as to what happens next. So that's why I'm very careful to differentiate between winning a header and winning the ball back, and winning a header and where the hell's the ball gone. And with Scales, it's too often uncontrolled in terms of what happens next with the ball. So I just wanted to pick up on that comment. Yeah, Scales has done a Ralston. I think that's what we can call it. He's done a Ralston. And no, I think it's great that we've brought in
quality and trusty. We've not seen much of him. A fleeting cameo the other night, and it would be interesting if we saw a few more minutes from him at the weekend. I'm really looking forward to it. There's a certain buzz about the place, as Paul McStay used to say, and quite rightly so, because we have won a meaningful Champions League game. I'll tell you something, it's always an absolute pleasure to be joined by Ryan in America and your good self, Alan, as well, just to give us some of the data behind the success. So thank you both for joining us this afternoon. 1,000 strong on the live stream. Thanks everybody for getting involved. Give us a big thumbs up on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. We're hurtling towards 30,000 subscribers on YouTube, and we appreciate all your support. Join us again half an hour before kickoff on Sunday on A Celtic State of Mind.